My name is Meg Hansen, and I'm running to be the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor in the August 11th primary. My approach to it is that a one-size-fits-all approach moving forward is unwise. The data that's been collected over the past several months conclusively shows that COVID cases cause major complications in the elderly and those with chronic conditions. These are the at-risk populations. So when we are thinking about how should we prevent outbreaks, we shouldn't use the number of new positive cases as the main measure to formulate public policy. Instead, what we need to look at is a number of hospitalizations and deaths so that we can focus our healthcare resources and minimize the risk of transmission within at-risk populations, especially elderly in nursing homes. So the fact is that we can't eliminate this virus altogether. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is here. The good news is that the vast majority of new positive cases are not with at-risk populations. So let's say you're not in the elderly and you contracted. Of course, that's not something that we want. You'll experience mild to moderate flu-like symptoms, and then you'll fully recover. So I think that understanding that and knowing that we need to focus our healthcare resources to prevent hospitalizations and deaths within the elderly. And as far as the rest of us, we can do rigorous personal hygiene, use plastic bags, social distancing, and when that's not possible, wear a mask. So these are ways that we can protect ourselves, but at the same time, not continue with a one-size-fits-all approach. So there are two ways that I would go about doing this. One is to cut government staffing without impacting healthcare services. And the second one is to promote economic freedom to get the economy going up again. So I come back again and again to an editorial that was written by the Caledonian Record that presented a very instructive blueprint on how we can reduce our government spending to the tune of at least $2 billion by reducing inefficiencies and top-heavy bureaucracies. They've listed across various state departments and agencies a number of, like hundreds of administrators who receive six-figure salaries. And that's one thing where we can, and I wouldn't call that austerity. I would just call that living within your means and understanding that we are facing a huge budget shortfall here, and we can't, we can't maintain the way things are going. Vermont, after all, does have the state government as the largest employer. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect would be deregulation. And deregulation is something that we can do immediately. And this is something that shackles economic growth and development. It's not just Act 250 that gets a lot of attention. It's also various local zoning ordinances, permitting, fees, fines, a lot of rulemaking that makes it hard to have businesses. We know a lot of businesses are closed down. To get them back into our economy, to get that boosting again, I think that's very important. So cutting down on excessive staffing without compromising services, and then boosting our economy. That's how we can come out of this COVID crisis. When I've looked into food insecurity, what I've learned is that it's very closely tied to unemployment. Right now, we have 1 in 4 Vermonters who are jobless, and so naturally, the food insecurity has increased tremendously. The good news is that the SNAP program is a really efficient and primary source for helping those people who are experiencing hunger and food insecurity. We have over 30,000 food banks and pantries all across the nation, so increasing awareness of access to local food banks is one. Sometimes there's stigma attached to that, so educating about removing that stigma and saying go ahead and access it when you are experiencing food insecurity. But a very important aspect that goes with that is educating people about making slightly different modifications in their food purchasing and food allocation decisions. So for example, you can purchase food items that give more energy, and you feel satiated longer. So cutting out on junk food, canned foods, instead investing in more healthy foods, that's one way to go. So I think educating people to make smarter, wiser, more thoughtful decisions when they buy food and how they consume it is very important to ensuring that food insecurity is not a problem here in America and Vermont. I always like to explain where I'm coming from when I look at this issue. Mild climate change has been demonstrated, but catastrophic climate change, predictions that the world will end in 12 years, things like that, they are speculated by computer models. And so I would draw a line between managing mild climate change and, of course, climate alarmism that basically feeds into these catastrophic predictions. So when I look at legislative proposals like the gas tax or the fuel tax or TCI, Global Warming Solutions Act, my understanding is that these are informed by climate alarmism. And in a state with about 620,000 people, that I think that is I don't think that is wise. Now, when I talk about managing mild climate change, that's about pollution. So when we talk about economic growth and development, that is not synonymous with pollution. In fact, thanks to scientific advances and 21st century technology, we can have economic growth while minimizing pollution. But if we're talking about, what we're not doing enough of, I would say we're not doing enough in terms of our structurally weak economy, in terms of the fact that we have the strictest regulatory burden in Vermont and how that's shackling growth and development. And I don't think we should use climate alarmism and juxtapose that against the desire for middle-class families to want to buy property and have businesses. So that's what I would say. I come to this issue as a woman of color. I'm an Indian American. I have an immigrant background. And so when I look at this issue, I find myself between a rock and a hard place. Why? Because I don't agree with the concept of systemic racism, because I don't agree with the fact that the fundamental institutions that have created America, the founding documents, the founding fathers, their ideals, that they are rooted in white supremacy, and that somehow systemically, there is a bias or prejudice against people who are non-white. I don't agree with that. But when I call that out, when I talk about that, we have a lot of people on the far left who call me a race traitor for saying that, So I'm mindful of that. At the same time, there are people who identify as far right. I call them reactionaries, and they don't agree with me. They tell me things that you don't belong here. You should go back to India. And of course, these are individual peoples. So my take is that racists exist, individual bad actors exist. And when they use positions of authority to hurt others, they should be held accountable. The rule of law is critical, and we need to condemn racists. But I don't agree with painting everybody with the same broad brush stroke. This issue has really come into national spotlight following the horrifying murder of Mr. George Floyd. And I think we all can agree that was wrong, and that those people use their position of authority in a bad way. All of us reject and repudiate racism. But again, it's the same point that kind of ties into my answer in systemic racism. I would not like to, and I don't think we should paint all law enforcement officers and all police departments as inherently racist. So if we're talking about defunding or abolishing our police departments, I don't support that. I think that would really hurt people who live in high crime neighborhoods. And I don't subscribe to collectivism. So I would definitely not like to go down that path. However, I do realize that we have a problem in terms of giving proper training, in terms of recruitment. I've spoken with a lot of law enforcement officers, and my understanding is that many are retiring, and there's been for many years now a problem with recruitment. So when you're not able to get good talent, that opens the door to less than desirable people coming in. And when they come in, they are very likely to then abuse their position of authority to do bad things. So giving proper training, getting the highest quality people coming into our police departments, that's the way forward. But that can't happen That can't happen in a climate where everybody is painted with the same broad brush stroke of being a bad actor. This is not a new problem. In 2010, our congressional delegation, which is the same as it is now, announced that the USDA had given an $81 million grant and a $35 million loan to a Springfield company called VTEL. And this was hailed as a game changer. And the idea was to ensure that everybody in Vermont would have access to broadband. 1 year later, then Governor Shumlin said that by the end of 2013, every Vermonter would have broadband access. So 10 years later, we're still talking about this issue. I've seen recent audits that show that the monies, hundreds of thousands, have been appropriated. We've gotten grants, we've got money for this problem, but they've been wasted because of inefficiencies and all kinds of internal workings of the government. So this problem, I think, is not about not having access, but it's about government inefficiency and waste. And so the way forward is for government to step aside and make room for private companies to step in and make sure that we are all in 21st century America in terms of our access to the internet. This is really why I'm running, and the idea is advocating for prosperity, not just affordability, but prosperity for middle-class families, young people, working professionals. And how do we do that? We do that with a three-pronged approach: economic freedom, healthcare freedom, and education freedom. So when I talk about economic freedom, it is about adopting a comprehensive view of economics. So I am not a free market absolutist. I don't believe in that. I think it's important for us to make economic decisions that take into consideration the consequences on the social fabric of our society. So deregulation is number one, I would say. Comprehensive tax reform. Then we need to diversify the economy so that we're not just dependent on the service sector and the tourism sector, as we've seen with COVID. It's been a problem. So building up Vermont workers by offering avenues to different forms of productive labor. So secondary, post-secondary education in the trades. As far as health insurance, bringing down the costs of that. Stopping healthcare rationing, which is now taking place under the umbrella of the one care, all payer model. And finally, education freedom. That's absolutely very important. So increasing ways and encouraging parents to be more involved with their children's education, expanding school choice to all Vermont towns, giving subsidies to parents who want to homeschool after COVID. Most parents have had to homeschool. So being able to encourage that and helping with innovative learning ways, using the internet and allowing that. And that would tie back into the broadband aspect of it, getting that as well. So I think these three ways would allow people the agency, the power, the avenues to create the lives that we want for ourselves and our families.